Welcome. I'm John Hart, the co-founder of the Conservative Coalition for Climate Solutions, or C3 Solutions, and I'm the editor of our news magazine, C3. Today, we're honored to be joined by a very distinguished expert panel to discuss energy affordability and security, challenges and solutions in a chaotic world. Joining us is Magatte Wade. She's the director of the Atlas Network Center for African Prosperity, and she's the author of a new book, which is actually coming out today. Magatte, there you go. It's called The Heart of a Cheetah: How We Have Been Lied to About African Poverty and What That Means for Human Flourishing. So we're looking forward to hearing more about that. We also have Chris Barnard, the president of the American Conservative Coalition, or ACC. And we may have another attendee who's attending to other matters, Lord Daniel Hannan. He's a member of the House of Lords in the British Parliament and the president of the Institute for Free Trade. So Chris, you can be Daniel's proxy until he shows up, because I suspect you would have a lot of the same views, and you're from the UK or Belgium. Well, as we approach this topic, we're less than a month away from COP, the UN Climate Conference in Dubai, and we're about a year from another presidential election in the US that's featuring, unfortunately, two candidates who are not wildly popular with the American public. And candidly, I think the world is on fire from a security perspective, and we're in a very polarized and dysfunctional political environment where you have one side that I would describe as kind of a radical degrowth movement. People arguing that if we somehow reduce energy supply, we're going to solve climate change. But then you have people who are sometimes reacting against that, and not always the most constructive way. Who want to dismiss that cultish alarmism by creating their own kind of pseudo-religious, what I would call climate atheism, which is almost its own system of unbelief that's not always all that helpful. And we see that even though energy prices have been somewhat stable, we have a conflict in the Middle East happening. We have the conflict in Ukraine as well. So Chris, why don't we start with you? We were at C3 Solutions and you were at COP. We were among the groups warning that Europe's dependence on natural gas from Russia was a national security threat. In hindsight, how much of a factor was that in Vladimir Putin's equation to invade? And just speak to the broader implications of energy and security. We saw last year we had a mild winter that helped stave off a severe energy crisis, but what is your outlook for this year? And where do you see Europe headed in terms of energy diversification?
Yeah, thanks, John. First of all, it's great to be here with you and with Magatte as well. Looking forward to the conversation. And to just quickly build off of one thing that you said that I've been really frustrated by is kind of the approach with a lot of people on the right when looking at this issue. And we rightfully reject kind of the big government left-wing approach. But we also sometimes tend to then throw the baby out with the bathwater, and we reject their solutions. So we also reject that there's a problem altogether. And what we do when we do that is we actually cede the debate to the other side rather than lead with our own ideas and our own solutions. And so one of the big things that we do at the American Conservation Coalition is we stand up for the fact that this is a real problem. Climate, the environment, there are issues that we need to deal with, but we can do that through innovation, through free enterprise, and that's how we solve this rather than just ignoring the problem altogether. To your question about kind of what happened with Ukraine and Russia and just broadly speaking, the energy situation, I think we have had since pretty much kind of the 90s a very easy time when it came to the energy landscape. People turned on the light switch when they got home and they turned on the AC and they didn't think twice about it. And we kind of started taking energy, affordable energy, reliable energy for granted. And we forgot that actually energy is one of the strongest geopolitical weapons that totalitarian regimes can have. Mm-hmm. And so what we saw in Europe happening is that Russia and Vladimir Putin played the long game. They understood that if they could get the Europeans to reduce their domestic energy production, to increase their reliance on foreign sources, especially on Russian sources, that they would increase their geopolitical leverage over the European continent. And so when Fukushima happened in Japan, and as a result, Germany said we're going to get rid of all of our nuclear plants, we're going to phase out domestic natural gas production, and we're just going to go to wind and solar. That very much played into Putin's hands. And actually, we found a fair few links between the Russian government and funding for green NGOs that have tried to push Germany and other European countries in that direction.
Yeah.
So really,
can I pause you on that point? Because
yeah.
That's a very, very important point, that the Russians may have been engaging in a propaganda campaign. And I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but if we can, it's worth following up and providing more detail and granular evidence for that, because there's a lot of folks on the other side that push back and say, no, there's no evidence for that. And I've read it, I've seen it. If there's anything you know off the top of your head, if you want to go deeper on that, but if not, I would implore all of us to focus on that argument, because it's a tell that signals what the intentions are from the Russians.
Yeah, I mean, we saw very clear links between Gazprom, which is kind of the large Russian oil and gas producer, and senior members of the CDU, which was the party that was in power in Germany. We saw funding from Russia going towards certain green groups. I honestly forget the names of the specific groups, but we can like trace the documents of where they were getting funding from the Russian government, because basically Russia was waging a disinformation war, whereas trying to push these European countries, specifically Germany, to get rid of baseload energy, whether it was nuclear, whether it was oil and gas, in favor of unreliable intermittent sources of energy such as wind and solar. And as a result, they knew that Germany would not be able to fill that base load overnight with wind and solar, and so would have to start importing energy from elsewhere. Where did they get that from? They got that from Russia. And so for over a decade, European countries were actually padding the Kremlin's coffers and essentially subsidizing what became the invasion of Ukraine. And Russia was basically able to do that and risk minimal economic impact as a result. And so just kind of like when to go back to your initial question about the energy landscape, that is basically that was a wake up moment for the world to realize that our energy is not necessarily secure. It is not necessarily abundant and reliable and affordable, and that it's incredibly important to make sure that we have energy security and that we can't tackle climate change or other environmental problems if we don't have energy security as a part of that mix.
Right. Well, Chris, yeah, there's a lot we're going to circle back on a lot of that, but God, I'm going to bring you into this. And, 2 years ago, you wrote a phenomenal op-ed in the Wall Street Journal describing COP26 as a, quote, plan to keep Africa poor. Are you more or less optimistic as the world heads into another COP? And how do you address energy in your book? And what insights do you have as we head into this another important meeting?
Yeah, no, sadly, in the book, I did not address energy because by the time when I was writing the book, I was mostly focused on economic freedom and the need for greater economic freedom for Africa as a whole if we ever want to build prosperity back home. The reason why it's not in there is because back to when I was writing the book, the world has not gotten this crazy yet about energy, or at least I was not paying attention to what, based on what Chris is saying, but maybe Russia was playing the long game, around inspiring others to decrease their own access to their own energy. So I did not see that, and that's not it was not a threat yet. It is recently, especially over the past few years, that it has become a real threat. Especially, I would say, the last couple of years. We've been hearing people being very noisy about this last 2-3 years, and that's really when I got involved in. Because for me, my life's goal is prosperity in Africa, and that's actually the reason why I've been promoting the free markets and economic freedom, because that's the only viable pathway to prosperity. But then when the crazy energy talks started happening, then I'm like, wait a second, this could be another existential threat for that prosperity that I would like to see built in Africa. Because in order to build prosperity, you need to have you definitely need the economic freedom and the free markets, but you also need access to reliable and affordable energy sources, right? And so insofar as that has been under threat, it had to be part of my fight. And so I started on this fight a few years ago, as I discovered that, it's just been going crazy. But it's not in the book, but I do write a lot about this, and I actually have a research paper for ARC on this that I could share with you and your audience after this. But in any case, no, I am not at all confident that they're going to hear or say anything different at this next COP. As a matter of fact, earlier this year, President Macron, Emmanuel Macron in France, he summoned a lot of people from the developing nations, many of them from Africa, to France, and they were supposed to talk about energy, right? Mm-hmm. And basically, the big plan there was, the big takeaway was, and on this one, I have an op-ed in L'Express, which is one of the top 3 newspapers in France. Basically, I was protesting this because the plan was, the big let's congratulate each other was, we got to have $100 million, that is $100 billion that is going to be given to Africa, right? To Africa in terms of climate aid. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, so first of all, this is so that we do not, tap into our fossil fuels based energy sources. In exchange, we supposedly get this money, but start putting the numbers together. 100 billion for 54 nations, made of almost 1.5 billion people at this point. I did the calculation quickly because we know that a good half of it is probably going to go straight into the pockets of the people who supposedly gave it to us in the first place. Another good chunk is going to go in the pocket of leaders, just the same way the aid money has been going for the past 60 some plus years and still nothing to show for. And then the little crumbs that are left, if you do the calculation, and I do have my sources for this, you're left with maybe $10 that each ordinary African is going to get. Are you seriously kidding me? And then when you look at but in exchange for that $100 billion that we should all be going and dancing around pots and being all excited about, they're basically asking us to sit on $12 trillion worth of oil and gas. And
not utilize it.
Yeah, and not utilize it for our economic growth. And I'm sitting there thinking, I know many of you think we're stupid, but let me tell you, we're not that stupid. And so, I don't think they're going to have a different tune this time. Absolutely not. Especially not when it comes to Africa, because again, I'm only talking from the Africa standpoint here. We basically are the weaklings that the bully is going to use to do the virtual signaling. I mean, when Germany is being super hypocritical and all of a sudden turning back some coal plants, because you know what, reality is a bitch, right? Isn't it? They're turning back their coal plants.
Meanwhile, is that the name of your next book, by the way?
It might be. No, seriously, because at some point, whether it's these socialist crazies or the anti-fossil fuel zealots of our times, reality at the end of the day is a bitch. So in any case, what you have here is they can absolutely do nothing about China. They can absolutely do nothing about India, because those guys have enough sovereignty that they will do what they need to do for their countries, no matter what anyone else says. So who are they going to be forcing their crap on? It's us, especially given that this is a huge business. I mean, this renewable, industry, it's a lot of money that we're talking about. And so I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist here, because the facts are very out there. I think Robert Bryce speaks about this very eloquently, if you want to know more about it. So I think we're once again being the pawns of a very dirty situation. And so that's what I'm seeing happening for us. But I have one message for the West, one message. It is, if you think that you're going to stand in our way of having access to our energy sources, and the only ones we know for now to be reliable and affordable remain the same, right? If you think you're going to stand in our way to having access for that, so that we can feed our growing population, we can grow our economy so that we don't die, if you think you're going to be able to do that, you're really kidding yourself. And I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. You say you don't want to finance, these fossil fuels related infrastructure projects, and usually you base that on ESGs. That's another big one, right. Because ESGs, so many of these companies don't want to go anywhere near these type of projects. Well, fine. You know what's going to happen? we Africans are going to turn towards the Chinese and towards the Russian. And I think it's about time you start to really pay attention to geopolitics. Yeah. This Africa is the youngest population in the world, has the youngest population in the world. Average age is 19 years old. By 2050, 1 out of every 4 people walking this earth will be African. Are you seriously considering this future in which you have completely pushed us in the hands of the Chinese and the Russians?
Right, right. Well, that's a fantastic segue. Speaking of geopolitics, and we have a very distinguished guest who's joined us, Lord Daniel Hannan. He's a member of the House of Lords in the British Parliament and the president of the Institute for Free Trade. Sir, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us in this conversation. I think you've. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Can you hear me there?
I can. Thank you. Excellent. We've got audio and video. Terrific. So just to bring you quickly up to speed on the conversation, Lord Hannan, I think you can gather the tone and what we've covered a little bit from Magat's comments. But I asked Chris before you joined to address, this fact that the world is on fire right now. We have security crisis with Hamas and Israel. We have the war in Ukraine, and energy policy has had and is having an ongoing major effect in those. So I'd like to ask you just to get your perspective on some of the questions I asked Chris. Is to what degree did Europe's energy policy influence, or how much of it was a factor in Vladimir Putin's calculation in the run up to the war in Ukraine? And what is your perspective on where we need to be going forward? Obviously from a UK perspective, but to the West, to maybe answer Magat's point that if we don't have a policy of energy realism, we're going to see the developing world increasingly find its way into the axis of authoritarianism with Russia, China, Iran, and its proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah.
Well, thank you very much. And I very much enjoyed that last sentence, that last contribution. Let me first of all apologize for, I'm joining on a shonky mobile telephone because my laptop isn't working for some reason. So there's a contrast between the grandeur of my surroundings. I don't know how much of this you can see, but this is the room where the king just put his crown on last week before opening Parliament, which is the quiet corner that I was able to find to rush into with my phone. So, but thank you very much for that very illuminating last point about Africa, which I thought was very powerfully made. Look, of course, Europe was unprepared and had made all sorts of errors in terms of false optimism about the availability and viability of alternative fuels. And without question, this emboldened dictators. Dictators are generally emboldened by energy policy. I remember when Chavez took over, there's an old Venezuelan saying that you don't have good or bad presidents. You have only presidents when oil is cheap and oil is expensive. And Chavez and indeed Morales and Correa, the 3 big hydrocarbons countries of South America, Ecuador, Bolivia, and Venezuela, were all products of the spike in oil prices in the early 2000s, as was to a degree Russian revanchism. Europe should have therefore had plenty of warning to prepare itself. Let's talk about what we're doing wrong now, though, in the limited time that I don't want to take up too much of people's time on this. But the mistake that I see everybody making now is they frame their response in terms of saying, we must have energy security, the title of this group session. Great, I'm all in favor of energy security. What does energy security mean? Energy security means the same as food security or security in any other vital commodity. It means being able to source what you need from the widest possible variety of suppliers so that you are not vulnerable to a localized shock or disruption, which might as easily happen on your own territory as anywhere else, right? So energy security does not mean North Korean style juche in energy. It doesn't mean trying to do everything yourself, because first of all, that is dangerous. You want to see a really fragile economy, look at one that pursues autarky. But second, it is bad for the whole world, because the way in which we bring the price down is by having the maximum interchangeability and the most interconnected grids and all the rest of it. So how do we do that? Well, again, let's talk about what we're doing now rather than the mistakes that led to this point. The United Kingdom, to my immense disappointment, is now almost certain to follow the EU down the road towards carbon border adjustments. And which kind of makes me think, what did we leave for, if only to repeat all of the same mistakes of the union that we were members of, right? Again, it's the basic protectionist fallacy. It's using arguments that were debunked by Adam Smith before America had become a republic, right? There's nothing new about this. If you start pushing up the price of imported goods, you don't end up protecting your domestic, steel producers or whatever it is who use high energy intensity processes. You end up ensuring that the supplies are bought from overseas, and therefore usually at a cost to the environment as well as to your own economy. It's absolutely crazy. So what we should be doing is using market mechanisms to bring down prices and to encourage innovation, not least innovation in cleaner technology. And here I want just very briefly to plug an idea that Rod Richardson, who I see on this call, is always pushing, which is one thing we know works is giving people tax incentives to invest in newer tech. Newer tech will almost by definition be cleaner tech, not because of any great altruism, but just because the efficiencies that make it cheaper tend also to make it more environmentally friendly. Within the US, and indeed within the European Union, there are various proposals to give tax breaks or other kinds of support to companies using this kind of innovation. Rod's idea, to simplify it massively, is to make that international so that you can, if you like, reclaim your tax break by investing in new technology in another country and get it back on your domestic tax bill. I don't want to go into it in any more detail than that, but it seems to me that that is the kind of solution we ought to be looking at if we want genuine energy security in the world. We want to be able to be secure because we've always got sun being piped in from Morocco, or wind from Britain, or oil from, liquefied natural gas from Qatar, or whatever. If one fails, it doesn't matter. And the more you do that, the more you encourage both a sort of Darwinian process where the better and cheaper and cleaner fuels drive out the older ones, and you encourage falls in price to compensate for some of the externalities that we are imposing in the name of eco-compliance. So I can see what we ought to be doing, but I fear we're doing the opposite. I'm afraid I see the world going in a much more protectionist direction than would have been imaginable 10 years ago. And I'm afraid that the war in Ukraine, followed now by this terrible crisis in Israel and Gaza, is very likely to lead people to think, well, we don't want a sort of 1970s OPEC crash situation. We'd better start upping our own domestic capacity, even if we have to do that through subsidy and protectionism. And that, I'm afraid, is more of the medicine that sickened the patient in the first place.
Well, that's a terrific response. I want to drill down a little bit, and this is an open question to everyone, is there's a debate in the climate space about what is a market mechanism. And the way I've always viewed the nature of a market mechanism is when the center of gravity is with the individual consumers, that they're collected, the wisdom of the crowds, in effect, is the market mechanism. So, for example, with an issue like electric vehicles, there may or may not be a role for basic research. I think there's a role for basic research and development, but when you cross the line into having technology-specific subsidies, it brings to mind what I wrote from Senator Coburn years ago, is that the best way to make something expensive is for government to make it affordable. So there are trade-offs in all of these technologies that I'd like you to touch on. And the mechanism we ought to be empowering is, and to Magat's point, is the bottom-up. Bottom-up involves individual citizens, actors, if you will, around the world who have a vested interest in having energy. We define energy security as energy abundance. And security is a byproduct of pushing for an abundance environment. How would you all describe how should we think about what a market mechanism is? Because again, there's a lot of confusion in this space about what that means and what it doesn't mean.
May I say one thing about that, because I'm going to have to go shortly. But P.J. O'Rourke, I think, said that when the legislature decides what can be bought and sold, the first thing to be bought and sold are the legislators, right? Now, energy is an area where legislatures the world over are deciding what can be bought and sold, and are fixing the prices and are giving subsidies and tax breaks and all the rest of it. And that, I think, creates the possibility that we are making mistakes, that instead of allowing the best alternatives to emerge organically through a kind of Darwinian process, we are rewarding the best rent seekers. Now, I'm not any kind of physicist or chemist. I have no idea whether the current rush towards electric vehicles is something that would be happening anyway, or whether we've all been mesmerized by Elon Musk, or whether there are now so many people in that racket. I just don't know. I have concerns about it, right? I see that China produces kind of, I think, was it 85% or something of all batteries at the moment. It controls almost all of the production of the relevant materials. And I think that I'd be more comfortable if there were a more diverse I don't know if the answer is in batteries, or if it's in hydrogen, or if it's something. I don't know. But I sure know that it is not something that is going to be decided by committees of politicians. I have been the politician in those committees often enough to know that disinterested scientific expertise is not what's driving it. So I came across an amazing statistic the other day. So my favorite statistic of the week, which is that there were more battery charging points for cars in Chicago in 1912 than there are today. Right? Whether we really are wise to make this punt of thinking that everyone can make this shift without having a little bit more of a market-tested proof of who's doing it more cheaply and more effectively, I think we may look back and see this as having been a massive error.
Magad and Chris, any insights on that?
For me, I think I want to go back to this concept of a story that we tell ourselves. And maybe it's just because I just came back from ARC, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship in London last week, put together by Jordan Peterson. But I think what we heard there was very interesting, because it seems to me like we're all talking from a very specific social fact. Like, we have accepted a certain parameter, and I'm very worried that the parameter we've accepted is the one that has been put in place by the mainstream, right? And we know also what the mainstream has been doing to very capable, researchers, people like Judith Curry, what they have done with their voices. These are not idiot people. These are not people who don't know what they're doing. These are not people who are known, to be in conspiracy or anything like that. They just, as true scientists, follow the science, double check their work. And if it doesn't make sense, then they question it and they open their mouths. Those are the courageous ones, right? So for me, I'm very worried about the story we're telling ourselves. And the story we tell ourselves matters because based on that story, then we take a set of actions. And I know that I heard, Chris, when you were talking about, I don't like the way the conservative, groups have been tackling the issue of climate. And I'm totally with you. I think I know exactly what you mean. And I don't think it's a winning approach, right? When you're just like, that doesn't exist. And this is not just, I don't think it's a starting game. But I think that some of us still are going to have to be the grown-ups in this madhouse. The kids are running around completely scared of their own shadows, led primarily by Greta and others like that. They have no idea what the hell is really going on. I'm not trying to take away Greta's funders from her. I mean, I'm sure she's done some homework and everything, but how complete is the homework? I'm not hearing what science usually is. Science is usually, yes, on the one hand, but on this other hand, and then you're looking at, if this is not happening anymore, we are going down this path of everything is going to go to hell, everything is going to burn. We got to make all of these drastic moves right now. Take off your mask. We don't know where the next source of energy is going to come from, but take off the mask because, this is bad. We're all going to die. And this is madness that's going on. We're not allowing, you know, the nuanced stories. We're not allowing the conversations around the trade-offs to happen. None of that is happening. We're just going like crazies, led by the freaked out kids. But we should have been the ones comforting and bringing data to them. But in any case, for me, so while you in the West, and it's in a situation like this, I say you in the West. Sometimes I belong to the West, but in this case, I will not, because I'm going to go to the side, but I think it's going to save everything here. So while you in the West are completely swimming in the noise, there's noise everywhere. The signal has been lost in the noise. It's not even a joke at this point. And then the polarization is just going wild. I'm going to be focusing on the Africa side, where when you focus there, all of a sudden, the signal is very clear. Right now, we have 2.4 billion people who are using dirty sources of fuel in order to simply cook and also warm their homes when they need it. And most of these people are in the global South. That's where the poverty is, right?
And Magat, give more detail and description of when we talk about. Describe what happens in the real world day to day when someone family is trying to feed their kids.
That's what I'm going to.
I know what you mean, but I think it's important to articulate what you mean.
And that's where I'm going to. So out of those 2.4 billion, we do know that 3.2 million of these people are dying every single year due to indoor air pollution around the world. And again, we're talking about poor people. Okay, this is we're not talking about this is not about the West. This is mostly they're mostly where we are, and out of those 237,000 kids, it's 207,000 of those are children. They're literally dying because their little lungs are getting fried, literally. Same for their moms. And by the way, women are the most affected by these things because guess who cooks? The women, especially in poor places. So,
what are they using currently? What is the cooking?
So what we're using right now is, for the most part, it's going to be coal. It's going to be kerosene. It's going to be wood that we went to chop, from the trees behind our homes, or like a mile away from our homes. It doesn't matter. Sometimes you walk for a long time to go fetch the wood. That's where it's coming from. And so imagine the particles. These are big particles, very dirty types of fuels that they're inhaling on a regular basis. Again, literally frying their lungs and the lungs of their children. You have people, so many kids are, and there is a great documentary on this one that's called a switch on or switch up or something like that. I will once again give you the real, title, but following in these very poor places, literally following kids who have cancer are dying in some of the most horrible ways. And all of this could have been prevented. All of this could have been prevented if we didn't have some of these. And it could have been prevented. We can still prevent it. Yet, what am I hearing? I'm hearing some people say, "Oh no, you can have access to gas, which is a way cleaner way of cooking. You can have access to gas because it's fossil fuels, and if you use it, then us 12 years from now we're just gonna die too. Oh, so you want our babies, black and brown babies, to die today, so that 12 years from now maybe your babies can be alive? So." These are all the things that we're seeing happening. So again, the noise is not, the signal is not lost on us. While you guys have been so spoiled, by having access to all of these reliable and affordable energy sources, built up your societies to the way you have built them up. And then now, just like with capitalism brought us so much, but now, I'm wondering, is capitalism really a good thing? Has it really done anything for us? And where do we go from here? What do we do? No. For a place like us, it's very clear. So in my case, what I'm doing is, because we're still very sane, and I'm telling you, the nonsense that we're hearing in the West, by the way, around these issues, we do not share into them. It's the complete opposite. young Africans, African people, minus the ones that Greenpeace and other places like that are buying to be their activists, supposedly supporting the renewables, minus those few lost activists, everyone else is very clear, because we see our moms, we see our grandmas, we see our children, we see our nephews dying every single day. And if they're not dead, living with very bad respiratory conditions, right? So for us, this is a no-brainer. But to me, this is where I want us to start the conversation. If somebody wants to have with me the conversation around this need to go to carbon net, to zero net, carbon, then I'm like, okay, then I need to make sure that you understand the trade-off. And that after you understand the trade-off, I want you to write down here your name, because the trade-off is this. What you're proposing means you are effectively condemning 3.2 million people to a sure death every single year, because it's happening right now. Of them, 250,000 children every single year. That's the trade-off you're asking about. Yeah. Do you want to sign your name down? But it's okay. And I have yet to find somebody who is willing to sign their name down, however crazy anti-fossil fuel zealot they are, because they know better. So now, if you can't sign your name down, it means you have now to, on top of that, work with me to make this thing better. Because now that you also have to do something about it. You can't just say, oh no, that's terrible, and just go back home. No, you're going to now work with me. And in that process, having to work with me to deal with that trade-off, then it's going to open you up to a little bit more nuance, to a little bit more sanity. And then from there, maybe you can also start to apply it to your own place of where you are. So for me, that's the strategy I'm using. I try not to be muddied into all of these, wild conversations where people have lost touch with what they're talking about in their real lives, because frankly, many people don't understand how the world works, including their own lives. But us, unfortunately, we're so poor and so disadvantaged that we cannot, it's not lost on us. The connections of life are not lost on us. So that's what I'm using. And hopefully, as we are able to shut off, literally, so many of these degrowth people like Davis Wallace Wells, and people like Jason Hickel, who, again, I have yet to see their name being signed down. I called David Wallace Wells out for a public debate. He said he would do it, and I'm still waiting for him to show up. But the proof is here. So my point is, that's how I like to answer your question when it comes to what do we do with the markets and all of that, John, because I feel like the minute you get into this breach, it's almost like a losing game, because it's almost like this thing of, does God exist, does God not exist? It's it has become a religion, and you know how it can be sometimes debating religion and faith with some folks. And so for me, I bring it back to a reality that we know.
Yeah, well, let me offer you a couple of hopefully encouraging points and points that connect the dots between how you just very powerfully articulated the trade-offs, that when you embrace this goal of we have to, quote, end climate change, that does and can mean you're going to be sacrificing the lives of 250,000 children in Africa if you don't think clearly about the implications of your policy. So what we've put forward is, when in your book, when you talk about economic freedom, even though you didn't overtly articulate the connection to energy, there is absolutely a very powerful connection. So Nick Loris on our team, we did a survey, an overlay of every economy in the world, using the Heritage Index of Economic Freedom, defined by less government, lower taxes, property rights, overlaid that with the Yale Environmental Performance Index, and we showed that the free economies are twice as clean as the less free.
Yes.
So if you want a cleaner environment, you need to embrace economic freedom. That is the connection. And we just put out a briefing book for all 2024 candidates, and it really can be boiled down to 3 sentences and 6 words that address some of these very deep issues that we've talked about here. Number 1 is just to say climate change is real. Number 2 is to say I care about environmental stewardship. And number 3, free economies are clean economies. And so the way to, what we need to do is rescue real science from the science, and acknowledge that when people look at the natural world, it's normal to have a sense of wonder. And so I'm not angry at people for having a religious reaction to when they see natural beauty and wanting to be good stewards. It's just there's a better way to channel that desire to be a good steward. And the way we do it, again, is to embrace economic freedom. And John,
I feel like when you say I'm not angry, maybe you're not, but for me, to know that 250,000 kids are dying every single day, and this is not a hypothesis, like it's not a hypothesis like they have, you know, it's now, and we know we can rely on it to happen every single year. And close to 3.2 million people dying. To me, at some point also, I don't know, I don't have the same type of patience that a lot of people have on these issues, you know, with people throwing tomato sauce at you know, paintings because we got to stop everything right now. But I hear where you're coming from, but I also think it's important for us to put that moral urgency behind these people's butts, because it just, otherwise the trade-off just feels like, yeah, well, I guess it would be nice, but they're not hearing anything right now. So you remain very nice and polite. I'll do the punching. Sorry.
Okay, Chris, where do you sit on this? Stand on this?
First, I was going to say that the worst part about being on a panel with Magad is I never know how to follow up and be as good as what she just said. It's a tough act to follow. But I think when it comes to the conversation around trade-offs and markets, what we have to look at is the fact that this kind of like top-down big government approach that we've seen in places like California, we've seen in places like Germany, it doesn't even work for the environmental things that they want to get out of it. So you see, like in Germany, for example, they sacrificed their energy security. They got rid of reliable, affordable baseload energy, and they're not actually meeting their climate targets or their environmental targets. They're reopening coal plants. They're burning trees and forests because they need that biomass energy to survive through the winter. And so we have this like really weird upside down world where the countries that are shooting themselves in the foot in the name of climate change aren't even reaching the very goals that they want to reach for climate change. And like I mentioned, California, like for example, when it comes to environmental policy there, the 2021 wildfire season was emitted more CO2 than the state had cut in the last decade. And so their bad environmental policy was outweighing all the progress that they'd made on emissions over the prior 10 years to that. And so they're not even solving the problems that they seek to solve. And at the same time, they have the highest electricity prices in America. Germany has the highest electricity prices in Europe. And so it's just a really crazy world where they're not solving the things that they say they want to solve, and they're making the lives of their citizens a lot harder. And I think when it comes to discussion about, okay, how do we actually solve these problems? How do we incorporate trade-offs? How do we take a market-first approach? Really, the word that comes to mind for me is the importance of competition. We see, for example, how the electricity markets in the US that have the most competition and consumer choice not only have the lowest prices because competition drives down prices and drives up innovation, but they also are actually decarbonizing faster than monopoly markets. So Texas, which is not necessarily seen as like a very climate friendly state, is actually the largest producer of clean energy in the US at the same time as being the largest producer of fossil fuels. And actually, if you look at the carbon intensity of the Texas economy, they're decarbonizing faster than California, using competition, using consumer choice. And I think it's something like 94-95% of Texas consumers can choose where their electricity source comes from. And if you give people the choice, often they'll choose something like clean energy because they like that. And you need to be able to give them the choice. But I think one of the things that California does, one of the things that Germany does and other places is they don't even give you the choice. And as a result, costs go up, innovation goes down, and you don't even solve the problems that you want to solve. And so I think really the most important thing that pro-market advocates need to inject into this conversation is we can actually reach our environmental goals. We can tackle climate change, we can make the environment safer and cleaner, but we can only do that through competition and through proper property rights and through empowering individuals, because at the end of the day, that's how we bring up innovation, that's how we bring down prices, and that's how we solve these kinds of problems. And the evidence is incredibly clear from the report that C3 has put out to the evidence that I just cited from other places, that competition really is the fundamental dynamic that needs to be injected into these conversations.
And Chris, I want to give just a plug and a statement of appreciation for ACC, because you guys are on the front lines persuading the next generation to think differently about these issues. So maybe talk more about, as you just interact with real people in the real world, younger people. You know, we on this panel right now, we have a lot of experience working both from the top down and bottom up perspective in terms of the policymaker discussion versus the activists on the ground. how do you break through what Magat was getting at? Is that we need to convey the sense of moral urgency and the magnitude and the urgency of the problem in a way that people can hear, and they can and frankly kind of deprogram some of the misconceptions that they have in a way that where they're going to listen and think differently. What is work with ACC and your engagement with younger folks?
Yeah, I'll start with two acknowledgments. The first one is that all the ideas that we discuss on this webinar, all the things that we talk about in our policy papers and in private meetings and all those things, they might be great ideas, but they're literally useless if you don't have people in the real world supporting them, right? And so one of the big things that we focus on at ACC is how do we talk about the things that we're talking about here today, but recruit a grassroots movement to support them, because that's when you start seeing real change. The second acknowledgement is the kind of, for a long time, the de facto approach from people like that agree with our point of view has been, these are just silly young kids, they're idiots, like we're just gonna dismiss them and just keep going on with our life. What ACC does is reverse that dynamic. We say, look, these are people that might be misinformed, they might be approaching this from a bad perspective, but the reason is because they've never been given a better alternative, and it's our duty to give them that better alternative. And so what we do is we go into communities across the country, we go to college campuses. We have over 30,000 young members across the country at over 100 chapters right now. And what we do, our first instinct is to tell them we care. Like we see why you care about this. We share your concern. And because we share your concern, we're going to tell you why we believe our approach is better. And you need to be able to open that door with people. And one of the biggest frustrations I have with people on the right is kind of that approach of condescension, which just completely shuts the door to so many people. And we're seeing that play out in real time in elections. Like young people are overwhelmingly voting for the left. Republicans and conservatives and whatever your term is across the world are losing young people more and more. It's because they don't trust us. They have no reason to think that we care about the issues that they care about unless we tell them. And so we tell them we care. We tell them we care so much, we have a better alternative. And then we talk about the issues from the perspective that they actually resonate with. If we tell them that, look, if you're forcing electric vehicles on the world and on the US, where are those coming from? Oh, you're getting batteries from China, or you're getting critical minerals from the Congo. Do you know how those are made? Child labor, slave labor. I'm sure you don't support that. And people then think about it twice. If you talk about something like nuclear energy that they've been so afraid of because so many green groups have told them that nuclear is dangerous, we tell them, well, actually, did you know that the largest source of clean energy in the world is nuclear? In the US, it's also nuclear. So maybe we should, and like if you look at the safety profile of nuclear, it's safer than any other source of energy. And so just lead from a perspective of caring about it and leaning into issues that you know that they care about as well. And then you kind of give them the fact bomb once they start trusting you. And so building that trust is exactly what we need to be doing more of as a movement. And that's why we're building a grassroots army across the country to help do that.
That's terrific. Well, we just have a few minutes left, and I want to try to get a couple questions in from the audience participants. One comes from Elizabeth. She's asking, what efforts exist now to break the dominance of China in batteries, especially for electric cars? Chris, you just touched on that. Anything you'd like to elaborate on, and Magat as well on that question?
I mean, the main thing right now is that we are almost deliberately outsourcing that production to China because we refuse to use our domestic resources. So like the United States actually has abundant critical mineral resources. We have huge lithium deposits, we have copper and nickel and all the other things that we need to build these batteries. We just have a regulatory process that makes it basically impossible to mine them. And so essentially the push that's happening right now among kind of our organizations is to simplify that regulatory process, to allow us to use our domestic resources, to trade more freely with our allies if we need to get them from India or Chile or wherever else it may be. But we need to allow ourselves to actually use the resources that we have, because right now we're forcing this green transition and we're increasing our reliance on China because they're the only country that can supply the resources necessary. And that starts back to my earlier point about competition. We can't even compete with the Chinese because we can't even use our own resources. And so that's really one of the big things that's happening right now is get the regulations out of the way, get the red tape out of the way, and allow us to actually use the resources that we need to do this stuff.
Yeah, and also we have another question. What are some effective ways to help Africans right now gain better access to natural gas, cleaner burning natural gas, and other sources of cleaner energy that don't lead to the tragic outcomes that Magad has described?
Thank you for the question. So there are some initiatives that are happening right now that have to do around bringing natural gas, especially to women, especially, and doing it in a way that they can afford it. Because the problem with why they're not using natural gas right now as much as they could, as much as their health would require it. So for people around the room who don't understand the realities on the ground, most of our countries are not piped for gas to just turn it around and it comes your way, right? Like when you're in a city or in most of the developing world, there are some pipelines, the gas goes there, you turn your stove on, the gas comes out to put the fire on, and it's voila, you have it. If you live in rural areas or where you don't have it, you have your propane tank somewhere in the back of your yard, and then it's wired back to your stove inside the house, and there you have gas as well. But for us, we don't really have that type of infrastructure. Many poor nations. In my own home in Senegal, what I have to do is I buy this big, propane tank. So it's I should know the size. It's a 6-liter size. I'm sorry, I can't speak in pounds or whatever, but it's a 6-liter size, and it's basically with a little tube, it's attached to my stove, and then that's how I proceed to get gas in. You can say that might be dangerous because, yeah, it's true. One day I forgot to turn it off. It was not completely turned off, and then I came back and I put a little piece of light. I was lucky that I hadn't let it run for too long, because I think today would have been a real big explosion, right? And me maybe gone with it, who knows? But we have those accidents happening as well. So that's what you need to do. There's only 2 sizes of these tanks. Mine is the bigger tank that is still, safe. I guess that's the biggest one they can have it for inside house to be safe. And then you have a much smaller one that's maybe 1 liter or something like that, depending on where you are. But the problem is a lot of these people, because when you live on less than $2 a day, or per person, you just don't have the cash flow to invest in a big tank, because to buy the big tank, it's worth easily somebody's monthly salary. So you just don't have that money that you can just block to sit, in that tank for the rest of a month. But what you have, though, is maybe $1, and that's what they spend on their coal for the day. $1 worth of, and the price of coal is the same as the price of gas, by the way. That's the other thing. So why should we stop? But the reason why it's not happening is because we have not had ways for these women to be able to just spend $1 of gas for that day, because
Right.
you have to buy the tank or nothing. So because they don't have that type of money, they go and they buy where they can buy the increments that they need, which is usually coal. And if they don't even have the money to buy coal, then they obviously go and cut the wood and they bring it home. So, but many of them can buy coal. That's what most of them are buying, coal or kerosene. So they have the money is there, but they just don't have the pile to buy the whole tank. And no one has worked really on this issue. So what we're seeing now, though, is now people like Pay Gas, or people like Chris Wright's group. You guys may know of Chris Wright,
Yeah, I know.
in the US.
Describe. Chris has a phenomenal idea on this.
I mean, yeah.
How to make it accessible. Yeah.
Yeah, he's just so wonderful. So that's what things like people like Chris have been working on. So using people can pay with their phone. You can come and bring your little tank. We put only what you can afford, like $1. You come and you're like, please put $1 of gas for me. And then they have very safe places where this can be done. And then you take it back home and then you cook with it. So those are some of the initiatives that are coming up. But of course, anti-fossil fuel crazies, even for them, this is not even an option. You know what I mean? So what can you do to help to support Africa and African women, especially, and children not dying from this and other people in the developing world? Is you have to promote and these solutions. These are solutions that exist. They're coming up more and more and more. And so you have to stand on the way of crazy ESG that is actually standing in the way of financing these type of initiatives. I mean, Chris can finance his own thing. That's a great thing. And what I love about Chris and how he's doing it in a very entrepreneurial way, meaning that micro entrepreneurs will be born out of this, because that's who has to distribute all of this? Who has to make it all, go into the tiniest, most faraway places? It's going to be people who embark on this, So,
Right.
so those are the ways that you can support, Africa. And like I say, don't hesitate pushing back. These numbers are real. The ones I gave you came from the World Health Organization. So last time I checked, most people, if it comes from the WHO, then it's fine. So
Right
yeah,
on.
you have to really fight on our behalf and really speak from this standpoint and say, no, this trade-off is not okay with us, and and promote gas. And of course, I am all about. Nuclear for me is one of the best energy sources out there. And also the new mini, reactors, I think those are very promising. So there are solutions, but we just need to stop standing in the way. And at the end of the day, also, the last thing I want to say is, like I told them in London, is West, but out of our internal affairs. We are going to be the ones in a collaboration with the markets, our own markets. We're going to have to be the ones deciding country by country by country what our energy mix is going to be made of, not you. And if you, again, I'm going to say it again, if you're going to try to stand in our way, then watch us go to your arch enemies. That's it. And you know exactly who I'm talking about. But because we're not going to stand in the middle and wait for death to just continue doing us on.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, both of you, and Lord Hannon, for your time. This is a fantastic discussion. We could go on and on this topic. And one last concept I'll throw in there as a conclusion. We also document through something called what's called the Kuznets curve, where when a country develops, it reaches a point, to Magat's point, that when individuals make decisions about how to feed their families, what energy source to get, they reach a level of prosperity that then results in a cleaner environment. But if you interfere with that process, you end up with a dirtier environment. You end up with less national security, more poverty, and more death. So that's really the choice. And so I hope we've made, at least raised the level of discussion a little bit on the nature of these trade-offs. And again, thanks to the participants, to Magat Wade with the Atlas Network, Chris Barnard, ACC, Lord Hannon with the House of Lords and the Institute of Free Trade. Again, I'm John Hart with C3 Solutions. You can read all of our reports at c3solutions.org and follow many of these topics and more at c3newsmag.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you.